Is Laura joining on Teams or is she coming in person? I've not seen her this morning.
Yeah. Just pick up. It's getting through to.
Okay, it's bang on 10 o'clock, folks. It's our final meeting of the year. I'm disappointed we're not quorate. I'm not expecting us to be. We might have one or two come in a little bit late, but I'm not. We won't be quorate for today's meeting, which is hugely disappointing as it's the final one of the year. There you go. So, where have I got me? I need bits of paper in front of me. So we'll start off then with apologies for absence, Lindsay.
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from councillors Akbar, Chalk, Sutherland and Sweet.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest as per the agenda from any members? No. I should say Councillor Waters has also joined us on Teams today, so welcome, Vera. As I said, morning, you're right. Just to let people know that the meeting will, as normal, will be recorded and will go out on YouTube. And here's public joining us. Morning, we've just started. So it is the final meeting of the year, and I do want to thank everybody for the work that they've put in over this 12 months. I'm not sure whether the dwindling attendance towards the end was because I worked a little too hard at the start with all of the TDD meetings. Maybe it was, I'm not sure, because it's not your fault. It was definitely me saying that's what we needed to do. So, you know, I think with this year, I think we've done a huge amount of really positive work, and I want to thank everybody, even those members who aren't here today, for their input into that. And I'm hoping that Laura, who's just joined us, will be able to give us a little bit of an update on where we're at with the TDD in a short while, Laura. So if we move on then to the minutes of the 12th of January, if I take them first for accuracy and secondly for matters arising. So page 1 for accuracy, page 2, page 3, and 5 and 6. We agree that they're an accurate reflection of the meeting for those of us that are here?
Awesome.
Thank you. Those will obviously that will have to go forward to board for approval. And if we then go back for any matters arising, so any matters arising on page 1. Matters arising on page 2. Laura, I don't know whether, because we've got matters arising the TDD deal on page 2, would it be appropriate if you could just give us a very brief overview as to where we are, please?
Thank you, Chair. We are in the process of negotiating the final bits of a deal. We are anticipating that we will have the final deal text and be able to ensure that leaders are happy enough to continue to progress this deal, that it can be potentially announced hopefully in the budget on Wednesday. I don't think that's confidential. That's the information that we have. Lots of work has gone on over the past few weeks on a number of big topics, but I think ultimately it is there's a lot in it. There's a lot in it for the region. There's a lot in it for communities. There's a lot in it for local authorities. There's elements of double devolution. So it is all in the deal. It is all entirely powers coming down from central government to the region, and then in some cases passporting down. There's not a single element of this deal that is taking powers up, which was, I think, one of the big premises. So a good package in there for each local authority, and we're just going through that. Hopefully we'll have the text that we need, and then be able to make that positive indication. And yeah, a huge amount of work has gone in, and thank you to so many of the officers from your authorities as well, who've spent ages reading revised text that comes in overnight that we have to have an answer to by the morning. It's been nothing if not labor intensive, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without the support of colleagues from all of the local authorities. But I wouldn't want to say it's a done deal, Chair. That would be a little too risky for me. I'd have to touch wood and rub a rabbit's foot and all things, but it's looking very positive.
Thanks for that, Laura. And you're expecting the announcement on Wednesday, is that correct?
Part of the budget announcement, we hope. Touch wood.
So everybody will eagerly await that then on Wednesday. Anything on page 3? Just to let people know that at the last meeting we'd looked at to set up a visit to Green Square Accord so that people could see the modular builds and the production around that. Sadly, we haven't been able to get it in during the time frame that we needed to do it before PERDA kicked in. So I will make it, I do think it's worthwhile doing. So maybe we can carry that forward as for next year's scrutiny. And obviously one would hope that some of the members around the table will be back next year for that. The only other thing on page 3 that I'd got was around the future home strategy, and there was a suggestion of a wider session with members and local authorities, officers, to encourage the proactive utilisation of opportunity available to deliver speedy, affordable and carbon neutral housing. And I just wondered if anybody had an update on that wider engagement session and if anybody knows of anything being arranged.
Unfortunately not, Chair, but happy to get an update and share it amongst members.
Please, thank you. Any matters arising from page 4? Page 5? And page 6. No, okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that. I am just going to ask Amanda at this point if you'd be able to do just a brief update, please, on the progress with the skills working group that has been taking place. I know there's been a lot of work done with sessions with stakeholders. So can you just give us a brief update on that, please?
Very happy to, Chair. Yes, so we held the first meetings with key witnesses last week to kick off the skills review. We interviewed 3 witnesses, really interesting sessions. There was a strong degree of alignment, I think, in terms of different perspectives across the 3 witnesses, particularly with regard to how well the sense that devolution has assisted the delivery of adult education. So lots of strengths there, some different perspectives because each of the key witnesses would come in, with their own unique perspective, which I think will inform the review. We did struggle to get everybody available on the day in person as a key witness, so we will take forward with emailing questions out to other prospective key witnesses to give a rounded perspective into the review as possible. Some of the key themes are around, as well as devolution clearly is working very well, it's around a bit more flexibility to be able to be agile and take things forward, specific sorts of target groups. There's some areas raised outside of the scope, but that merit attention, but not for the skills review in itself. So I understand from Lindsay, the draft report will come back to Overview and Scrutiny Committee in June, and then they're on to the Skills Advisory Board. Happy to take any questions.
Amanda, has anybody got any questions for Amanda? No, thanks ever so much for doing that and stepping in, Amanda. It's this particular piece of work has been ongoing now, I think, for a year and a half, without us being able to really get to grips with it. So it's good that it's finally happened, and we'll have something to report into the next municipal year with that.
I think it's more that we've given the practitioners some feedback, which is always useful, because I think that there's the opportunity for them to do things like peer reviews and comparisons like that, where they can learn from each other around the organisations. So,
and hopefully that will be taken on as a possible.
I think there'll be a report, won't there? So.
Yeah, the report will go to June, or the next scrutiny meeting of the next municipal year, which will probably be either end of June or July. So that will go into that meeting. Okay, moves us on to item number 6, pages 7 to 10, and the mayoral question time response. I don't know whether anybody's got any observations about the response from the mayor on this that anybody would like to comment on. I think the only thing I'd got was on topic 3, greater scrutiny of arm's length companies, and the chair of ARAC and myself were to have a conversation about this. We haven't quite managed to formalise that yet, and I was hoping Mark is aiming to join us at some point this morning, so I may get him to comment on the work that ARAC are doing when he first joined us in terms of the arm's length scrutiny. But that's my only comment on that. Has anybody got any other comments that they would like to make on the mayor's responses? No? Welcome, Jackie.
I'm so sorry, Chair.
No, don't worry. Welcome, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Taylor is substituting for Councillor Sims from Sandwell this morning. Okay, so we'll move on then to item number 7, and that's the WM 2041 update. And I believe Cheryl Hiles, who is joining us on screen, is going to present that to us. You've all had the paper and you've all had the presentation as well. So over to yourself, Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Apologies, I can't be there in person today. I will just share my screen with you so you can see the slides and you don't have to just stare at my face, because I'm really conscious how large that screen is in that room. Right, is everybody okay? Can they see this? Can they see my slides?
Yeah.
Excellent, wonderful. Please do shout out if there's anything you want to ask as we go through. Chair, can I just check how long you would like me to present for?
I think for the whole paper, including questions and answers, we've probably, because it's quite a small agenda today, so I think we've probably got up to about 11:15. So we've got a significant time that we can spend on this. Okay. Obviously, we don't have to fill the time, but I think we probably will. So if you could present perhaps for 20 minutes, and then the rest of the time will be taken up with Q&As.
Of course. So we're going to do a bit of a triple act on this programme. But anyway, I'm delighted to be able to come and talk to you about this topic today. Just to highlight, we are almost 2 years into a 20-year programme. So our target to achieve net zero by 2041 is a big one. And in terms of where we are now, this is a kind of early milestone to see whether we're on the right trajectory, where we're going, and hopefully whether we will be able to achieve our goals. So just in terms of context for the programme, you will have seen that we obviously have our 2041 target, but we have a 5-year plan from 2021 to 2026 to try and make sure that we are moving forward in the right direction. In terms of that plan, it is for the region as a whole. So one of the things that I think is really important to stress is that the Combined Authority is an actor in this, in achieving these goals, but we are by no means the only player. And one of the key things from our point of view as a team is that we need to work with all of our partners, all of our stakeholders, all of our teams to embed the objectives around climate change and achieving net zero into current programs and current practices, so that we don't just say, well, we've got some budget over here to achieve net zero whilst we're getting on with the daily life over here. So on that basis, we are highly reliant on government policy and on funding to enable delivery. But we have to be clever in the way we do it. So we can't, as I say, just expect money to come in. We need to be changing the way in which we act and deliver on our existing priorities to help us achieve net zero. The good news from our point of view is as a team in the SINS Directorate, so Strategy Integration and Net Zero Directorate, is that we've been able to secure increasing levels of resources. So you may or may not even know that Energy Capital actually started as an external partnership that came into the Combined Authority. We're now fully embedded into the Combined Authority with the Environment team, who are a core part of the CA team from the start. And we've been able to increase the amount of resource that we've brought in, both within the Combined Authority and working with the teams, but also bringing in external funding from government and from places like Innovate UK and other areas to support the programme of delivery. And just another thing to add really is that the devolution deal is absolutely fundamental to some of the objectives within our 2041 targets. So when we actually started talking about the trailblazing devolution deal with government, net zero wasn't even mentioned, and it was actually the actions of all the local authorities and the combined authorities in negotiating with government to get them to recognise how important we feel achieving net zero is, and the role of the local areas in doing that. And actually, I'm really hopeful that come Wednesday we will see a devolution deal that fully reflects our objectives around net zero. And actually accepts the role of local authorities and combined authorities in helping government as a whole achieve net zero by 2050, which is their target. So I just wanted to start from a positive place. So in terms of where we are at the moment, obviously there's a lot of work was put into both developing the 2041 strategy and the 5-year plan, but there are lots of other strategies and plans that have been developed off the back of that wider programme, and these have been recognised nationally as leading the way from the combined authority's point of view. So the WMCA was ranked the highest combined authority in the country by an independent assessment of how well we were doing across a number of different areas, from looking at governance, funding, looking at mitigation and adaptation around climate change, looking at how we want to address the issues through integration with communities, and working on diversity, social inclusion, all of those different targets that are on the screen here. And we were ranked, as I say, as the top local combined authority, and we scored second in terms of all local authorities as well. So across the spectrum, we've scored well over average across the country, which is a great endorsement of what we plan to do and our starting point. But I think the key message really from our point of view is our plans are solid, but now it's about finding ways to ramp up delivery, because 20 years might feel like a long period of time, but it really isn't when we look at the scale of what we need to achieve. So when we first started looking at this, the accelerated scenario, as it's called within the 5-year plan, is the one that we need to get onto in terms of being able to achieve our objectives. And it was very clear when this piece of work was done 2 years ago that we weren't in the right place and we weren't on the right trajectory. So there was a lot of work that needed to be done to embed net zero into the wider programmes across the region to make sure that we could actually achieve our goals. So I won't dwell on the facts here, but these are just a number of the points that we drew out of the 5-year plan. And just to highlight that one of the points down here is 41% of deliveries are related to technology. So recognising that we have to see a change in technology that's used, and therefore that requires huge investments. But 16% of the change is about behaviour, and the environment team have really focused on looking at behaviour change and working with our communities to work out how we can embed that behaviour change across the region. So I mentioned before that the strategy is for the region, and everybody's working hard across the board to deliver on this. But there are a number of commitments that the WMCA has made that were highlighted in the 5-year plan, and those are the ones that we're going to just run through in sequence so that you can get an idea of how well we're progressing. Obviously, in terms of scrutinising our ability to deliver the 2041 strategy as a whole, there is many stakeholders who need to be involved. So I'm going to start with the energy commitments, then we'll move on, and my colleagues are going to take over and talk a little bit about some of the other elements as we go through. So one of the first commitments was to set up a regional approach to unlock investment of over £3 billion that we need to improve the energy standards of our homes. And within the first 5 years, we're looking at needing to tackle just under 300,000 homes to bring them up to standard. In terms of the way that we're doing this, this has been a core part of our devolution deal negotiations with government. The way in which funding is allocated at the moment only allows us to target individual measures on properties. It doesn't allow us to think about the wider issues that those homeowners or tenants are facing, and doesn't necessarily allow us to help them out of fuel poverty, which from a regional perspective is a really important aspect of what we want to achieve as well. So we've been working hard to get government to see that actually just targeting measures is not enough. We need to take a more holistic place-based approach to this, and we need to make sure that we're addressing the issues of the citizen, not just of the building. So far, government have heard that that all of the local authorities competing for resources to make these changes, which are absolutely fundamental, is not something that is either a good use of local authority capacity, where they are having to bid for money, or a good use of time when we're having to, an expertise when we're having to essentially compete with each other in order to secure funding. And it's also not particularly helpful for our supply chain because they can't see a long-term investment opportunity. So our supply chain, instead of investing to increase their capacity and help create new jobs in the green sector, what generally tends to happen with government funding is at the moment is that they just put their prices up. So prices increase, we don't get the good value for money that government are looking for, and you get a very short-termism approach. So that's been the fundamental basis for us negotiating with government to do it better, to take a better approach, which we're pleased to say that I think they've heard. It may be difficult to achieve any change within the current fund mechanism because government is committed to spending in the way that they have already set out, but we're hopeful that we may get to affect that in the future. So not this spending round, but from the next spending round onwards, we may have a much better mechanism if we work closely with government. In the meantime, obviously, we have to work with what we've got. So the Smart Hub team was established as part of the Energy Capital team. That stands for a sustainable market for affordable retrofit technology. So recognising that we need to look at the market as a whole. We have managed to secure more than £30 million of government funding into the region for measures in social housing, which is the priority areas for government funding to go into. Obviously, the behaviour change aspect is how we help address the challenges within buildings that are in the social housing space. We have got another £34 million of consortium bids that we're awaiting decisions on. One of the important roles that the Combined Authority has been able to play is to bring together small partners where they don't necessarily have the capacity to bid on their own. So the consortium approach is really important, and we've been able to achieve good learning from each other, good sharing of resources, and hopefully as a result good quality applications. So we're very hopeful that we will secure a good proportion of that 34 million that we've also bid for. In addition, we are looking at keeping our innovation elements going forward. So we are working on our Net Zero Neighbourhood programme, which is about making sure that we are taking a place-based approach to doing what we want to with neighbourhoods, knowing that retrofit in itself isn't something that people necessarily understand or want to engage with. The idea of the Net Zero Neighbourhoods is to go into communities, work directly with local authorities and their communities on the ground, to understand what communities want to achieve and set the objective of net zero within a wider context of what they need in their immediate area to help them improve where they live and make their own lives better. So we have a cohort of 5 communities across the local authorities at the moment. We've funded local authorities to work with their communities to bring forward net zero neighbourhood proposals. We have invested, or we're literally about to sign the agreement with Dudley to invest 1.65 million of combined authority funding into the first one of these models to demonstrate how we can actually monitor what we need to support the local authority and the community to develop the programme in the way that they want to. But crucially, the role of the CA is around making sure that we can attract private finance into these communities, because we know government funding is not enough to see the change that we need to. So although the government funding will be able to pay for the elements within the social housing and some of the worst housing, we do need to make sure that private finance is going in to enable that wider transition. So we're working in a partnership with Bankers Without Boundaries and Equans in Dudley to make sure that we've got an investable proposition that can be replicated. And we've been drawing in expertise from national programmes that are going on and working closely with government to make sure that the region is well positioned to attract funding in this space when we're in as a country we're in a position to make the numbers stack up, because at the moment the return on investment for retrofit still is too low to attract private finance. So we're looking at blended finance models to see how we can make that attractive. So that's what we're doing on achieving the first of these objectives. We're by no means near the £3 billion that we need, but we are definitely, we have the foundations to make sure that we can do our best to get there. I'm jumping to the number 3. I'll explain that in a moment, but I'm sure if you've had a look at the slides, you'll understand why. The third objective is around energy capital working with local authorities, local enterprise partnerships, stakeholders to actually undertake and implement local area energy planning and enable net zero energy systems and to support renewable delivery. Now, local area energy planning is something that government hasn't made a fixed decision on whether it's something that they will support, primarily because it's an expensive thing to do. What it actually means is integrated infrastructure planning. So it means that we're not looking at planning for spatial planning, planning for transport and planning for energy, the 3 different silos that it currently exists in. The energy bit has been ignored by the public sector because it's primarily a process that happens within the private sector. So each of the distribution network operators creates a business plan that's approved by Ofgem, and there is some engagement with our local authorities in that process, as in they ask the local authorities what they might be planning to do in their area. They have a look at some of their published plans to inform them. But the reason why it's really important is that the West Midlands will rely on our wider energy infrastructure in order to achieve our net zero goals. So essentially, a lot of our decarbonisation will be through the process of electrification, and we need to be able to therefore access the electrical network to the extent that we want to be able to upgrade our energy systems. What is happening at the moment is a lot of investment in that infrastructure is happening elsewhere. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, there's big offshore wind farms being built to help decarbonise the overall electricity network. And there's big infrastructure programmes being developed to bring that power to the urban centres. When I say urban centres, I generally mean London. So it's really important that we see investment in our network. Our network is currently run by, it was Western Power Distribution, it's now run by the same organisation, but they're rebranded as National Grid Electricity Distribution, or NGED for short. So it's really important that we affect how they plan and invest so that we have access to a decarbonised electricity network to be able to achieve our goals. So that's kind of the context within which we're working. Again, our devolution deal is really important in this space. So we've been talking to government about who would fund this sort of thing, how it might work, whose responsibility it is, how the local authorities would get capacity to be able to support this process. We've been working hard to try and get clarity in that space. In the meantime, again, whilst we wait for that, we've been delivering lots of innovation programs. So we secured funding from Innovate UK to deliver a wide range of different innovation programs, which help give us a competitive advantage in this space to understand how local energy systems can work and how we can create a market for them to actually incentivise what we need to happen on the ground. So we've worked in Coventry on the Regional Energy Systems Operator project. We've worked in Cannock Chase with the Zero Carbon Rugeley project. We've worked with Sandwell on the Green Skies project, and we've been able to focus particularly on investment models for local energy systems as part of those innovation programs, which has put us ahead in terms of being able to work out how we can secure money and investment into these projects. The really exciting thing, I guess, from our point of view is that we've got a good relationship with Innovate UK, and securing this investment, we've been able to support our local authorities to apply for money directly for them to get staff within their own teams. So there's a programme called Fast Followers that we've helped a number of local authorities bid for, which we hope they will be able to get some resources within the local authorities themselves. We have been able to take some of the innovation work we've done and embed that into practical tools that will be of use. So our approach to local air energy planning will be twofold based on our innovation programme. The first will be about creating a decision-making tool and platform. So there is a tool out there already that we intend to use that our electricity network operators are really keen on. So we need to make sure that we're working with them and using their approaches that they will be happy with, because obviously they have to get their business plans approved by Ofgem, so we need to be talking the same language. But we are hoping that we'll be able to create a tool that is essentially like a digital twin with lots of data and information in it, which will help local authorities and other stakeholders understand the relationship between the built environment and the energy system. So for example, you'll be able to see the demands of the energy demands of buildings. You'll be able to see where heat networks are planned, where there's waste resources. So you can start to see how in a place that these opportunities come together. So we'll be focusing on this platform and using innovation funding that we've managed to secure externally to try and take that forward. And then we'll be working closely with our local authorities to help work out how we can provide value in terms of our technical expertise, our understanding of the way that the energy system is planned, to help them work with our distribution network operators to inform the through flow of information, shall we say. So we'll all be talking based on the same data and information. We aim to make sure that governance process is really clear and helpful, because at the moment I think a lot of the engagement happens at a very local level, and the strategic planning that happens within energy companies isn't informed very well by the local authorities, because those relationships aren't there. So we'll be working closely to do that. And just as a kind of final thing on this, there's an opportunity to make sure that this happens better in the future. And our innovation projects have put us in a leading position to work with Ofgem to make sure that whatever they develop in terms of the future energy system, and that's all up for grabs, it's all changing at the moment, that we as the region have a voice in that process, because at the moment we don't, and that's the really important thing in terms of making affecting investment decisions and affecting the amount of money that comes into the region. So just finally on this, the fourth point on energy was very similar. So it's about making sure that we are driving forward change, that we're making sure that our industry and our commercial sectors can compete internationally, and that we can be a global leader in net zero. So back in 2021, the Mayor announced the West Midlands as a regional pathfinder, and that has enabled us to lead the way in a lot of this work. It's underpinned our trailblazing devolution deal negotiations. And as I said, our ability to work with Ofgem has come from that innovation project known as RESO, the Regional Energy Systems Operator project that we've been leading on. Finally, the Mayor has set up an industrial energy task force because it was identified that our industry were the most vulnerable at the moment. So although we're focusing on net zero as part of this programme, energy prices obviously are a really important aspect that have come to the fore over this 2-year period. And our industry's ability to weather the storm as the energy prices have increased and maintain their competitiveness in a global economy is really important. So the establishment of the Industrial Energy Task Force and the investment that's gone into that will hopefully make a fundamental difference in terms of supporting our industry through this really tricky period. So finally, I just wanted to say on what we've done so far. This is just a diagram that shows considers the 5-year plan but also considers the regional energy strategy, because as the Combined Authority, we're responsible for the delivery of the regional energy strategy that was produced back in 2018. And it shows that there is money going into what we need to do, but there is also quite a large proportion of elements of the regional energy strategy, particularly that aren't currently funded. So we've been building up capacity over time to try and get to the point that all of these elements will be covered, and hopefully from April this year we'll be in a much better position, because we won't just be able to follow where the funding is available. We'll be able to take a more strategic approach. So that means that number 2 on the list, which is something that we haven't been able to make much headway on up until now, over the next year we'll be able to focus on this as well. So this is about unlocking investment of up to £70 million in land-based renewables and PV. So this is something that's delivered by the private sector, and we'll be working closely with the private sector to make sure that we help remove the barriers that they face in working in our region, and to try and improve the efficiency of our commercial sector in doing that. So essentially what we mean is we will probably need renewables built into sites. We probably need storage built into sites in order for companies to have access to cheap electricity, because actually that's the only way you can do it. You will always be vulnerable to price fluctuations unless you have a direct power purchase agreement with a generator, or you actually generate and keep energy on site. So that's an area we'll be extending our work in 2023, 2024. So basically this is again a snapshot from the 5-year plan. It shows that we do need to be working across domestic, commercial, industrial, transport and land use, as well as the systems elements, in order to achieve our goals. We need to scale up and we need to extend our scope, but for the first couple of years we've got a good solid foundation, and the scaling up and extension will be the focus from April onwards. So I'm going to stop talking there, and I can't quite see the room, the whole of the room, but I think my colleague Steve Barrier is in the room, and he's going to take over and just tell you a little bit about how we're embedding the net zero objectives into other parts of the Combined Authority. So Steve, are you there?
I am here, Cheryl.
Shall I carry on driving the screen?
Could you drive a presentation up?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I just point out, just be mindful of time, please?
I'll be very quick on this.
I'll try 10 to, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll be very quick on this area. As Cheryl mentioned, hitting net zero cuts across most directorates within the CA. So I'm just going to focus on 3 here, and colleagues on screen, Kate and perhaps Laura in the room on the first one on transport, can help me where necessary. But you'll see the target there is reducing car usage. There are 3 elements to that: reducing the number of car trips, reducing the kilometres travelled, and the third part for this is investing in the fleets and infrastructure to decarbonise our transport system. So our colleagues in the Transport Directorate and in the TFWM have provided some insights there, which basically break down into 2 elements: infrastructure investment. So you'll see there the investment into hydrogen electric buses, into the railway stations to provide the public transport system which is fit for purpose, but then equally the investment into elements which will encourage behaviour change. So making it easier for people to use public transport through things like the Swift card, etc. Investment has been significant on this. If you go to the next slide, please, Cheryl. Hello, thank you. These are just some of the highlights of the investment areas that have been made recently. Overall, over £1 billion attracted into the region for transport funding. You'll see on some of those bullet points investment into bus priority, encouraging people to use the buses better. Bus improvement plan, metro investment. But one that's quite interesting is bullet point 4, which is £17 million into boosting active travel by making it safer to cycle and walk and wheel. So it isn't just about the hard infrastructure. If we're going to encourage people into the public transport, we do need to make it a safer environment for them. So significant investment in those areas, good returns in terms of customer satisfaction. So we are seeing that move. We do know that public transport trips did take a hit during COVID and after COVID. And we can share some of the data after the meeting, if that's okay, outside our meeting, Chair. Thank you on that. I'll rattle through and then take up questions afterwards, if that's okay. The next area to look at, please, Cheryl, is housing. And I understand the committee had a presentation from housing colleagues at the last meeting, so you're fully aware of this, so I won't dwell on this. But the original aim was to implement a zero carbon homes route map, and the Housing Directorate, Housing Regeneration Directorate, combining that into a future homes strategy, which is really important because it brings together lots of different elements into one strategy, which will underpin and guide particularly the CA's investment into regeneration and housing, which of course is equally important as we go into the next phase of devolution. Can't say more at this stage, but equally it will be very important for that. So I think you've covered as a committee that last one. Is that okay? Thank you very much indeed. Cheryl. The last one here is to work with stakeholders to secure and win investment. And I'm just going to broaden that slightly because into a wider economic presentation, because I think it's very important to remember it is very important we hit low carbon, near net zero carbon, but that and economic growth are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're mutually complementary. So we've seen investment into the sector. Low carbon sector is the fastest growing sector in the region economically, which is a good sign. We're seeing investment coming in, 500 new jobs from new investment, more work being done in missions globally. But the important point is the one that Cheryl started with, which is if we're looking at 41% of our target being hit by new technology, that will come through many of the businesses that are investing in the region as well. So that's an important crossover into the technology we're developing as well. And the last point there, the Coventry Airport Gigafactory site, we know is a priority for the region in terms of battery and storage and new technology. And the region is world class in its recycling and reusing of batteries. So the more we can get investment into this, the better. That's a quick rattle through those slides. Again, if that's okay, Cheryl, I'll pick up the questions at the end. Thank you, Cheryl. And over to Jackie.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. For those of you I haven't met before, I'm Jackie. I'm in the environment team at the Combined Authority, and I'll just spend a couple of minutes on some of the aspects of the net zero programme that we're supporting through the work we're doing. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to support the region's businesses in achieving net zero, and thinking about how we could do that. We worked with businesses to set up a net zero business pledge. So we worked with some small scale businesses, Federation of Small Businesses, to understand what their needs were, as well as some of the region's larger businesses, to put that together. We're just about to launch a new website, which will come with a toolkit that we've worked with businesses to support. And we're delivering in partnership with Sustainability West Midlands, because they already have a significant outreach into the private sector and run various programs, training, events, and networks with business. So we're hoping that will support everyone across the region from the private sector to work with us. As Cheryl made the point at the start, the 2041 target is something that needs to be regionally owned, not just the Combined Authority. So we hope this will help bring the private sector on board to support. Cheryl, next slide, please. The other part of our programme that links into net zero, partly to do with adaptation, but also carbon sequestration, is around the natural environment and fits into that land use priority that Cheryl touched on with renewables. We are in the process of setting up a natural capital governance that will be linked into something the government is going to ask us to do, which is to establish a local nature recovery strategy. So that will be a statutory responsibility for us to set out how we're going to contribute to the government's 25-year plan on nature recovery. So we've waited to set up any governance to make sure it aligns with that rather than set something up and then set something up again. We've been waiting 18 months for the guidance for the local nature recovery strategy, but we believe it's imminent. But we haven't just sat back and done nothing while we've been waiting for that. We've had a really successful community green grants programme up and running, which has given grants to improve community access to green space, and we're looking to extend that, working with Commonwealth Games legacy funding. We've managed to establish some strong partnerships with national, regional and local organisations. And we've also got a fairly significant tree planting programme. So we have a virtual forest website, and we've secured support from the Woodland Trust Emergency Tree Fund, and we'll be setting up a West Midlands Forest Partnership to help accelerate the tree planting that will support the work around carbon sequestration. Next slide, please, Cheryl. We've touched on behaviour change as being something that's really important in order to help us reach our targets. What we're not suggesting here is this is the responsibility of people in isolation. We need to be creating the right conditions for making choices that are supporting our net zero goals, the easy ones to make. But there are some things that we can do to help us get there. I'm not going to run through all of these points because I know we're short on time, but our carbon literacy training has been really successful, both internally at the Combined Authority, but also we are now rolling it out through Commonwealth Games funding so that people in communities can also take that up and look at some of the things that they're able to do. And the other one to pick out probably there is linked into Cheryl's work on retrofits. We've produced some energy efficiency guidance, so the behaviour change officer in our team has worked to do that. But I'm happy to take any questions on anything else on that slide. And then finally, there is some work happening with the skills team who aren't with us today, but Steve will pick that up.
Thank you, and apologies, committee. That slide should have moved back into the middle bit, so apologies, that's my fault. Yeah, so the skills team, and absolutely, we talked about the economic benefits from this and jobs growth and new skills developing, and a lot of retraining needed to be done by the existing workforce, but new jobs coming through as well. And there's a series of programs ranging from NVQ qualifications, diplomas, and boot camps in a whole range of low carbon industries, including, as Jackie has mentioned, in terms of retrofit, in terms of sustainability, and in transport as well. So training in electric vehicle maintenance. And we've seen over 2,000 learners already on those courses across the region since 2021. In retrofit particularly, I'm focusing on retrofit because that is one of the largest areas to have an impact on net zero. We've trained up over 100 people already, and a further investment is being made by the Combined Authority to train up a further 200 students in retrofit. This is providing the skills for people to go and implement retrofit solutions, but also to accredit the retrofit to make sure it's of a standard which is required and gives confidence to the homeowners that they are doing their bit and having safer warm-ups. I think that's it on the skills. If I may, Cheryl, it's back to you, I think. For
yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, colleagues. So just finally to say, one of the important elements that we want to pick up going forward is around tracking our progress, and Jackie's leading on looking at how we can collect data to actually demonstrate how well we're progressing. The problem that we have at the moment is government statistics lag by 2 years, so we can't get any sensible government figures on any of the aspects that we would like to be measuring because of that. And obviously we've also had impacts on data because of COVID and things like that. So we're looking at developing a specific data dashboard, which will not only help us see how well we're getting on, but also help us raise awareness across all of our partners on what still needs to be done in order to keep us on track. And then finally, just to say that we talked about a lot of this about being about behaviour change and bringing people together, and there's this whole series of different forums from kind of specific things on industrial energy through to much more community focused citizens panels and engagement that's taking place across the whole of the programme to make sure that people are coming along the journey with us. So yeah, I'll stop now because I'm conscious of time. Apologies. There's so much to talk about because there's so much going on, but we're happy to take questions on any aspects that I would like us to.
Thanks very much for your presentation, very detailed and informative. So we as a committee are asked to note the progress being made by the CA, and I think it's also appropriate for us to comment if we are assured that the CA is on, or that we believe that the CA is on track to deliver through the 5-year plan ultimately for 2041. So I'll open it up to questions from the committee, and I've got Councillor McCarthy first.
Yeah, I'm heartened by much of what I'm seeing in this presentation and the breadth of the work that is being conducted. And one item that I'm saying that 41% of this was technology delivered. I'm quite interested in the level of technical competency we have as groups to be able to assist the small to middle-sized business. The blue chips are fine because they can afford the extra people. The middle and the smaller business struggle to get enough technical staff to do their own tech or whatever they do, what they specialise in, and having officers on their board or within their business community is a lot more difficult. Now, they quite often look to us for support because if they're going for a lot of rooftop PV, there's a forest of people out there, and many of them are mindful of the sort of almost fiasco of broadband, where many of them ended up paying up to 10 times as much as they should have done. What support do we provide so that when they do the sourcing, and many of them are not big purchasing organisations, we are, in a sense, providing some of that purchasing technology? How do we go about that?
Are you happy for me to come in there, Chair?
Yeah, whoever's going to take the answer.
Yeah, I'll try taking them, and if anybody else, if any of my other colleagues want to chip in, then feel free. I completely agree with you in relation to our industry as one element. So we have lots of small and medium-sized enterprises that make up our industrial base, and that is particularly the focus of the Industrial Energy Task Force, working with them to identify what they need, and then fighting very hard through the TDD process, our Trailblazing Devolution Deal process, to ensure that we have the focus and the capacity and the money to support them, particularly as the European funding has all ended at the end of this financial year. So that is a key opportunity. I'll say watch this space. I'm very hopeful that a service will be able to be provided to our industrial base where this is of critical importance. In terms of the wider commercial sector, absolutely, I would really welcome any feedback from colleagues on what we should focus on in relation to our commercial programme, because that's what we'll be developing from April onwards. So what can we do to support those other businesses, and we're working closely with the business support team through the LEP integration process to understand what that environment looks like and where best we can support. My expectation will be that that will be picked up by the economy team, and that Energy Capital will work to make sure that the technical expertise that's necessary is provided into that programme.
How do you go about in attracting that funding to which you've referred, that you need to do this, convincing those awarding the funding that you've got access to the technical expertise? Because technical expertise is one of the big shortage skill and expertise competency areas in our economy.
It is, and the Combined Authority are lucky in that the whole point of having the Energy Capital team is to provide some of that technical expertise that can be shared. So we've got a good start in that space, and we are making sure that we're lobbying government for the funding necessary. We also have good universities that we have access to, a lot of experienced people who've been providing this kind of support under previous European programs, and the objective is to try and ensure that they are able to continue to provide that support going forward. It's still a watch this space because of the changes that have happened as a result of the elect process.
We've got Kate Ashworth on screen from Energy Capital, who's indicating she'd like to come in and comment on this. Kate?
Just a quick one to add to Cheryl's point, and thank you for the opportunity. I would just say as well, we are looking at, for the Industrial Energy Task Force, we're looking at an established model called Made Smarter, which is run by the High Value Manufacturing, which brings in the best expertise into the region whilst fast tracking that programme. So we are very much looking at actually how do we support those businesses? How do we make sure that the solutions are fit for purpose and we're not building in obsolescence later on down the line? So it's something that's very much actively part of our programme.
Thank you. Councillor Waters?
Good morning. It's not really a question, it's observations. Now, on the energy efficiency, I read yesterday that now you all know there's prepayment meters, and what they're going to be doing at the moment, they're one of the highest tariffs that there is around, and they're looking to actually reduce these because these are the people that are most vulnerable and haven't got the most of money, which I actually welcome that. And the other one on transport, I'm sure you're all aware, we've got West Midlands Travel National Express strike coming up, which will be ongoing for days and not just for one day. Hopefully, when this is all sorted out, our transport should start and make progress from what it is, and we'll get people to start and use buses because they're not using them at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Vera, for that. And I think your observation, particularly around the prepayment meters, is really important, and about what we as a region, in terms of the power. I can't remember the term. The energy, the power agreements, energy. Written it down, and I can't remember what it is. Anyway.
Local area energy planning?
Yeah, no. Come back to me, or I'll find it in my notes. But I think it is really critically important in terms of sustainable energy, and making sure that everybody has the opportunity to be able to afford that. Dan, you?
Well, no, I'm going to guess, but probably regret guessing. You don't mean the energy price cap.
No.
I told you I regret guessing.
I shall go through this while the next person talks, and then I'll come back on that. So I've got Andrew next, Councillor Borres.
I've got 2 points. I'll start with the easier one first. I make it 83% of the housing in the UK is owned by the private sector. So that's either individuals or private homes for rent, there or thereabouts. The biggest barrier that I see to people doing anything about this is the whole of the insulation industry is filled with sharks, which is people who come along and you cannot trust them. Now, there are some very good people and there aren't. And unless we get on top of standard solutions with recommended suppliers that you can rely on, we're never going to break this. I insulated my house, which originally was built before Napoleon was sent to Elba. My energy bill is about 1,500 quid a year. My house is about double the national average size. And that is because I've insulated it. Now, some of those things I've done, you won't find in the government's energy systems. If you've got solid floors, you've got solid floors, but you can put insulating underlay under your carpet. So when I replace my carpets, I put insulating underlay. It's not as good as having this much of foam in your foundations, but it's better than nothing. We need very practical guidance on how you do stuff on a range of different challenges. At the end of the day, this is simple. It's roofs, it's windows, it's walls, and it's floors if you can do something about it. It's actually a lot more tricky. Suspended floors, you can do something about. Concrete floors, you're budging like I did. We have got to, and I think the Combined Authority has a role to play in this, working with its constituent authorities and with those that are outside. A lot of people can do something about this. They have the cash. I mean, we focus on people without cash, and perhaps that is right, but in this issue, there's lots of people with cash. So can we build something into our strategy that addresses that issue? True. It's true.
Who'd like to take that?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in. I agree that the ability of the supply chain to provide products and services that consumers can trust in is a really important element, and that's something we've tried to build into our preferred approach to retrofit that currently government funding doesn't allow. But I didn't know whether Jackie wanted to come and say anything about the behaviour change aspects, because I think the behaviour change programme is part of our programme that's focused more on the able to pay, as you say, and I think maybe that's a good point, that we could look to link between the behaviour change programme and the supply chain aspects and try and find some positive action we can take in this space.
Yeah, I can come in on that. So it isn't easy, and we know there's some examples of where people have been trying to make inroads into encouraging uptake of retrofit. So there's a programme called Civic Square, where they've worked really hard on understanding some of the barriers to inclusion in the retrofit agenda, and certainly with the net zero neighbourhood, that will be one element of that programme, because obviously you've got individual people, but if you can get people doing it in more significant numbers within a community, that then also has knock-on effects for things like cost and supply chain and so on. So I agree, it's a wicked issue, and it's not an easy one to solve, but it will be really important in terms of increasing the number or working towards that target, and it will certainly be part of the behaviour change programme as we move it forward. But I can't think off the top of my head of many really good examples of where it's worked. It's something that every city is trying to crack to sort of access the able to pay market, and I think some of the financing and skills will be really critical for that as well. So things like mortgages and so on, and how we can build it into some of the financial products too.
Yeah, there are some cities that are taking this into their own hands and actually delivering programs themselves, where they procure the product and then sell them directly to commuters. I think Leeds are looking at something along those lines. There are other models that we can explore if that's something that the team would like us to look into.
If I may just very quickly, Cheryl, please correct me on this, but I think there were two elements to your question, Councillor Barrow. One is the interest from the private sector, but also the trust. And there is a lot of work, isn't there, Cheryl, in terms of accreditation and in terms of standards for how retrofit is done. That's something that we're doing through funding programmes that the CA has attracted. But from our various workshops on the devolution deal, we were pushing government, or asking government to look at how more devolutions can establish a retrofit commissioning framework in the region, so you get better consistency with the marketplace. And there's a lot of work that Cheryl's team, the Smart Hub, do to work with the industry to improve those standards and quality, which then builds a confidence and hopefully encourages more people to take up those retrofit measures.
It may be some of the the carbon zero neighbourhood that's planned for Dudley, because a lot of that is based on private sector coming in to support it, and the mixed tenure of property. So there's some social housing, there's a lot of private housing within that neighbourhood scheme. So I'm guessing some of whether the outcomes of that will depend very much on the model shape going forward and what can be offered then to wider to the private sector.
I mean, I insulated my house, the whole house, for less than the price of a heat pump. This is not difficult to do. You've just got to know how to do it. I happen to work in the industry that did this stuff. And you pick the bits that will work for your property, because there is not a standard solution. My house, I've insulated it on the inside of the walls because it's solid walls, and you can't I didn't want to make it look horrible on the outside, so I put the insulation on the inside. But I know how to do it. I know what products are there because I happen to work in industry, and I've found a couple of decent tradesmen to help me do it. But you know, I'm special. You've got to get that out into a load of people, and it's also disruptive.
There are some businesses who are looking at doing this as well. So the private sector is looking at a commercial offering in this space. So I think that there's definitely a recognition of the need, and you're absolutely right. It's a bespoke situation, so every property is different, and that's one of the real challenges about this area. But there's definitely the resources going into it to try and work out how we can make it easier for people.
And hopefully you'll be working with the energy suppliers. I think one or two of them are beginning to get into this, and they will provide you with that trust, because I think most people trust most of the energy suppliers that are left.
Yeah.
Particularly people like Octopus, who have a good reputation in this kind of area.
They do.
That's some really good slide. Councillor Kettle.
I do apologise for being late, by the way, to transport problems. There are several aspects of what you've said this morning. And all right, today's news is that the CA will now be, they're scrapping about 10 of the people who allocate the funds where we have to bid for money. They're scrapping, and apparently the Combined Authority, as from this morning, will have a £4 billion pound budget over 4 years. And you mentioned the LEPs. I thought we'd scrap the LEPs, by the way.
I think in this respect, it's the local energy.
No, I meant LEP integration, sorry. In terms of, yes, the LEPs have scrapped, but as a result, the need to support businesses that some of the work they were doing is being integrated into the Combined Authority, and in some cases still with some external partners. So there's a whole transition process that we need to feed into to make sure the energy bit is in there. That's all I meant. So apologies if that wasn't clear.
It's all right just sitting here naively and thinking that it's a level playing field out there. If there's 600 schemes of wind turbines waiting to be connected because they can't get the cables, right? And there are people who want to put more cables under the channel to buy French nuclear energy, and yet, as close as Dudley, we've got areas where we can't get enough power in because it's so expensive to put power in, and really. We've got to go back to thinking of creating power locally, and the moratorium on I don't like wind turbines, I think they're gross, but on the other hand, if we'd got wind turbines owned by local authorities using the power in their environment, their supply chain, supply your own in effect, the immense value to the local economies, it's tremendous, you know. And I think we're talking, just in the West Midlands, we're talking 30 billion in a year. It's tremendous. So I don't think we've got a level playing field. And in fact, I think there's a bit of dream time going on at the moment, in that when you read the national papers and they tell you that there are 600 schemes that can't even be connected, waiting to be connected. All that dead money. Vested interest, don't want it done.
That's a very, very important point. And the reason why we have two programs going forward, one on local air energy planning and one on renewables and supporting renewables and removing the barriers is exactly that. There isn't a level playing field. We're at the bottom of the pack. Nobody really cares what happens in the West Midlands in relation to the wider energy system, because there are all these big issues of connecting all the big generators. What we have to do is make sure our environment is positive for our businesses and our citizens. So we do need to plan effectively what can happen where and develop things locally. Building integrated renewables, local storage, smart local energy systems, heat networks, all of those kinds of solutions that we can have within our local geography. And that's where local area energy planning is. The foundation of that is making sure that we've got the data and the information to know what's the most commercially viable where, and then make sure that we can ensure that the distribution network operator will allow us to connect.
And how do you feel about these very small nuclear localized production of power through the nuclear systems they use on submarines, in fact? I know Rolls-Royce have done a lot of work there, and it's very close to come to fruition and being given the go-ahead. But if we had half a dozen of those around the West Midlands, we could supply our own.
They're an innovation coming forward, yes, but there is also a lot of proven technology out there already. So there's nothing stopping us progressing with technology that's already commercially viable. They may become commercially viable in the future, but at this stage I would say making sure that we deploy solar where we need it, putting battery storage in, because we have an good reputation in batteries within the region. Getting all of that installed into our built environment as it stands is the first stage, and then as innovations come forward, yes, absolutely, we can work with them.
But at the moment, most of our panels come from China, and most of our wind turbines come from Denmark. So, you know,
that's a national government issue that we failed to harness our leading capabilities in some of the renewables technologies, absolutely. But we shouldn't be doing that in the future. We should be making sure that we try to bring those technologies in. And that's why things like the Gigafactory are important if battery technology is one of those things that we want to actually produce in the West Midlands.
And has it been refloated? I mean, didn't they go bump a few weeks recently and had to start again?
That was a different one, but...
Is that a North, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, and we're still online for using Coventry Airport, are we?
There's still negotiations that are being taken place for Coventry. Yes, right.
Thank you.
Amanda? Oh, sorry. Oh, what's it? I'm still learning. Thank you, Chair. Your starting point was Sorry, your starting point was, does the committee feel that we're getting assurance that the 5-year plan is progressing? And I'd like to thank Cheryl and colleagues. Yeah, I feel assured that there's really good progress. I think the report's really good. And thank you for your presentation. I think you've built upon what you've put in the report. I've got a question, and it sort of builds on sort of some of your latter points, Cheryl, in particular with regard to commitment 8, which is around the net zero business pledge. I think many of us will have the will, you know, the spirit that we are wanting to sign up to a pledge towards net zero. However, there will be some practical difficulties and obstacles that will enable us to actually achieve that. So though the spirit is willing, you know, actually we're unable to progress. So for me, in my business, one of the particular areas we've come up against is this local energy area planning issue, you know, that actually we've had houses that we've been unable to connect to the grid because that wider planning is not there. So that's quite a significant barrier when, you know, for economic reasons, you know, all the it's a key part of Combined Authority objectives to build more homes. So that energy area planning, got the right terminology, is absolutely a must. I think the other barrier, so I guess my question around the pledge was, you know, great, we can share business, you know, good practice. Are we sharing the obstacles? So one obstacle is around that area planning, and for me another obstacle is around EV charging points, because we've got a fleet of vans, we've got lots of people going around Black Country repairing tenants' properties. We are, you know, coming up to a decision-making point of, do we invest in EV vehicles? but another barrier is around it just always won't work at this point in time. So I guess some of the earlier commitments probably need to be delivered to get us down to this commitment 8. And I suppose my key question was, are we clear on the obstacles for business?
Thank you.
Shall I-
We are definitely clear on some of them. So Jackie, yeah, we're definitely clear on some of them, and examples of where barriers have been met is something we're collecting at the moment as part of the evidence to help us focus our local energy planning processes. But Jackie, did you want to say a little bit more about the business pledge?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in the context of the pledge, sorry, I'm half speaking into the microphone and half looking at you, that it is very much set up for businesses to learn from each other and to address obstacles as well as opportunities and success stories. So yes, we want to celebrate successes and things that are happening well, but we're also, as it evolves, looking to understand what some of those obstacles might be, setting up groups where people have got similar challenges and can work together. So it's we're hoping it's very inclusive in that respect, and that not everyone that signs up knows exactly what they're going to do and how they're going to get there and has already got everything in place. It's much more about creating a supportive environment so that, you know, we're all working towards net zero. So that is very much the spirit that we've set it up in.
May I just add on the EV charging point? If there are particular issues, it would be helpful, please do share them. One of the things that the Combined Authority does in this space is works with the local authorities who are responsible for the EV charging on roadsides, etc. And then we're looking at the gaps, and our infrastructure for zero emission vehicle strategy is about kind of identifying those gaps and where we should be putting strategic interventions. So if there are particular things that are happening in relation to EV charging that are causing difficulties, they will be picked up through the local energy planning process, most definitely. But we're always keen to hear of examples so that we can help target our interventions. So thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I come here this morning from a different angle. I've kind of scanned these reports very, very briefly. It's been a busy weekend for me. And I'm going to put something on the table that means a lot, not only to myself, but for the Black community. In particular, and I've put this on the table before, whereby there are gaps in these reports, and I say that with the utmost respect. To meet our targets, we have to go to other countries. China has been mentioned, Denmark has been mentioned. We're taking a lot of minerals as we sit here and speak from African countries. And when I talk about the gaps, I'd like to see these things referred to in these reports, because we are people that's supposed to be educating the public. And there are children in the Congo in particular that are going into little holes in the ground to take out minerals for us to meet our targets here in this country. We have a global responsibility, and I think it's only fair that that information in one way or the other is put in these reports to educate all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Interesting point there. Is anything referred to in the on the website about that, Jackie?
So we didn't put it in this report because it's, I guess in terms of the net zero agenda, I completely take your point. It sits alongside, but one of the things we are looking at that links into that point but doesn't wholly address it is around the circular economy and keeping resources at the highest value possible to try and avoid extensive mineral extraction of new materials. So whilst it doesn't completely address the point you're making, that is a piece of work that we're doing, and there is some material on the website, so I can make sure you get the link to that. So it only partially addresses what you're saying, but I think it's an important point.
Thank you, Jackie. I I think it's really important that we don't miss out on our global responsibility. And I think it's really important that very much like the information that's given on cigarette packets, for example, it's kind of like every report referring to the fact that, remember, these minerals are taken from these countries, and perhaps how we're addressing that. It's something that's very important. Thank you.
So I think perhaps we can pick that up in the observations of this meeting about where and how that's reported and whether or not we need to improve on what's available. Kate, sorry.
It's okay. I just wanted to follow up on that point. I think it's really, really important, and apologies, my camera is off. One that we would one that we do have a focus on internally when we're looking at these schemes, and we're trying to ensure that the kind of route to decarbonisation that we take does not there have a kind of unintended consequence in terms of the kind of wider boundary that we're looking at. One thing we're doing is working with academic partners as part of our innovation programmes, particularly the University of Birmingham, but across the kind of West Midlands, Coventry University also have programmes on this, where we're actually looking at kind of alternatives to those rare earth materials, which are so precious and also have kind of environmental consequences in terms of the extraction of them. So I think absolutely take the point around ensuring that we are mindful of it, and we are accountable, and we report on that mindful process, but we are also making sure that we try to reduce the impact of those going forward.
Thanks, that's interesting, and say to be an observation from this particular meeting that we pick that up in the final report. I've just got one very quick one before we move on, and that is, if we think about the environmental commitments, does this combined authority have any role in food security and food sustainability?
Jackie, did you want to come into that one?
I would, not directly, no.
So if it's not directly, do we have an indirect role?
I mean, unless colleagues think differently, it's not something that is necessarily within the core functions or powers of the combined authority. I suspect you're asking because you have something in mind, which I'm sure we'd be happy to consider. Just mindful that you know, that we what's the phrase, we're often asked to just make sure we're sticking to our knitting. And this is one where I don't think we have anybody directly employed or looking at it, but Jackie might tell me I'm wrong.
We have done a small piece of work in the circular economy route map on food. And we did a small piece of work linked to the Commonwealth Games in terms of food labelling across menus. So we haven't done nothing, but we haven't done very much. I mean, it's a huge area of work. Potentially some of the next iteration of the Community Green Grants programme could do some community-based circular economy work could do some circular economy work with communities around food and food sharing and so on, because we know there's quite a lot happening at a community level, things like Slow Food Birmingham, and we've come across other organisations working in that space through that work, but it's not something we have done extensively through our programme.
No, thanks. And I suppose really it was just sort of an observation around the growing and increasing reliance across many communities of all economic backgrounds across the region in food banks and in cost of living crisis and all the rest of it. So it was really just to explore whether there was anything in terms of any responsibility, anything that we could be doing that we're not, but it's reassuring to know that there might be opportunity through that additional work that you referred to, Jackie.
Sorry, when you said food security, I went straight to a very different place, but about the security of actually getting food into the country, which is why I was like, we're not doing anything. But in terms of actually helping, almost everything we do is about trying to make a difference to the people that live here, whether it's trying to keep fares low, to keep more money in the people's pockets, trying to make sure that, as Jackie said, we've got access to communities, because what we don't want, there's communities relying on food banks in order to survive. So while not directly, we do some things indirectly, but everything is about, the whole point is to try to improve the lives of the people that live here. So sorry, I thought you were when you said food security, I went to another area of food security.
No, sorry, it wasn't necessarily about getting food into the country. It was really about the
it wasn't the cucumber shortage you were trying to pick
well,
up.
no, it was about helping people to grow their own cucumbers.
Understood.
Steve?
It is only a small example, but I think the point that it's not part of our remit, but if there are opportunities, we will do the tie-ups through connections. There's a very small one we had with our community recovery grant. One of the submissions was from a group was looking to reuse empty buildings for growing the produce. And we put them in touch with the University of Birmingham who have got an interest in food and food security. So again, we will use our connections and contacts and pass on a signpost where we can.
Thanks. That's reassuring to know that that happens. I think it's important for our community. Go on, Martin, really quickly.
Just before I can, local heat networks and the low grade heat is available for those places, because that's the cheap heat, isn't it?
It is.
Coming on from Councillor Taylor's point, we need to be, I believe we need to be acute, and I'd like to know how we are acutely aware of the frequent exploitation inherent in some of the supply chains for things like some of the common and cheaper EVs that are around at the moment, or some of the heat pump manufacturers that when we have some of these things integrated, systems integrated in Britain, where the parts come from abroad, we have got a moral opportunity here to control that supply chain and how that supply chain is developed, so that when it goes all the way back, it's not always just as far as the hole in the ground where things are taking out of. It's a workforce in China who might be exploited, or children that might be, underage children that might be used manufacturing stuff. All of these things we need to be very aware of if we're spending public money in some of these areas. Feedback on that?
Agreed, and I think we can raise that in procurement standards. Absolutely, but it is something that we need control over. So where we can get devolved funding, we can then have control over those procurement processes. Where government controls that, we have less ability, and it's more of a lobbying point.
On that, we've been doing a piece of work with the local authorities. So we have a net zero directors group, and one of the pieces of work that we're looking at is on how we use procurement in relation to scope 3 emissions, which are those that you're talking about there. So that will be a piece of work that we're developing with the local authorities. So we are thinking about that.
And recycling supply chains as well. So.
Yeah, any supply chains, yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody for your participation in that particular item. I think it's been there's been a lot of really good and interesting and quite diverse questions on it. The observations that I've picked up is work around confidence in the private residential sector relating to information on installation and providers of that. Being aware of the obstacles for business community in terms of signing up to the pledges and how that's going to, what are the mitigators we can do for that, and then the gaps in reporting the wider impact of the UK's knock-on impact of the world, and particularly in the developing world, and how we can pick that up and include that in more, make it more visible. So thank you everybody for that. Everybody, if you want to be excused, you are more than welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim.
Any questions?
Thanks, everybody.
So that moves us on then to agenda number 8 and ways of working. I'd kind of wanted to have a little bit of a discussion around this for future scrutiny going forward for the next municipal year of scrutiny. Scrutiny has evolved quite significantly since the CA was first set up, but it shouldn't be a process that stands still. We should always be looking and thinking about how we can do things differently. How can we make it more meaningful? So I now we've set up a combined authority scrutiny chairs forum across the country of national chairs and vice chairs, and we've had 2 meetings of that, which I think has been really productive in discussions about what different authorities do, how they do things here, and how we all kind of sharing good practice, which I think is really important. And some of the things that I'd wanted to bring to the table for thoughts for next year's work programme. We had it mentioned, particularly at transport scrutiny, about the importance of some sort of training for members right at the start of the scrutiny year, particularly for new members coming on. You know, it does take a significant time to get your head around the combined authority and understanding the difference between combined authority scrutiny and local authority scrutiny, because there is quite a significant difference in that. So it was really to seek your views on us putting some training in place, external training, either through the Centre for Public Scrutiny or through the LGA, whichever is the most appropriate, right at the start of the next year. And just to see what people thought about that, if they thought that would be valuable to them. The other things that we discussed in the chairs forum that I'd like some thoughts from yourselves on are how can we increase and improve public engagement. You know, we know we put these out on YouTube. We do get the occasional member of the public coming along if there's a specific topic, but how could we be more proactive in engaging the public in that? We have, not perhaps so much this year, but I think last year we did invite more portfolio lead members along to talk about the political aspects of a particular paper. So we've had Mike Bird here a couple of times now. We've had Ian Courts along, because again, I think that's really important. But do members find that valuable? And would you see that that's something that we should make more of an effort to make sure that we do in the next year? And finally, for thought, we understand that Michael Gove's office is planning to strengthen scrutiny at combined authority level and I believe in local authority levels. And there's talk of a development of something called the Office of Local Government being created. Now, we haven't got any detail about this at the moment, but certainly in terms of strengthening scrutiny, what that might look like. And we did think from the chairs forum that actually when we've got some more detail, we will make a group submission to Michael Gove on this about what we think is, you know, will work well, what we think they've perhaps omitted, how we could do it differently. But I'd just welcome anybody's thoughts on what I've put to you and anything else that you might want to think about putting into scrutiny going forward. Jackie?
Chair, you bring some real value points here. I think you can't knock training at all. But I'm a very plain speaking person, so you'll have to excuse me. I firmly believe, that elected members need to want to come to these forums.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Now, I'm an elected member, and for a long time, I have been interested in all the issues that we speak about here. Not all my colleagues will be, what they're interested in, it's not my forte. But to drive this in a positive way, you need to have members that want to come. Yes. And I'm not quite sure how we can make that happen.
So I think one of the things that maybe as chair I can be doing is talking to the leaders to say that they need to think very carefully about who they nominate. You know, we've had people nominated for different committees who work during the day, so they can never come to a scrutiny meeting. So there's no point in nominating them. So from that point of view, but in terms of actually how you engage elected members in coming along to these, once the nominations have been made, I mean, I'd welcome other people's views on how we get that interest going.
Well, for me, I don't know what positions I'll be having for the next municipal year. I'm going through local election. And if I'm successful, whatever position I have, I'd still like to come here because it builds up that continuity as well. So, you know, I'll leave that to you, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Laura, I don't know whether you've got any observations as an officer in terms of how we strengthen scrutiny.
Yeah, so it's really both the two committees that are hugely important are Overview and Scrutiny and Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee, and the other committees that do a lot of work are also equally important. But as an organization, we can't do our jobs properly without effective scrutiny. We just can't. There's a huge amount of money and responsibility that flows through this organization. And as officers, we look to bodies like Overview and Scrutiny to be challenging to us and to in a sense help us understand about the decisions that we're making. We struggle with quoracy. It's not just in this committee. We've discussed before this issue about people needing to be here for meetings to be quorate. We have lobbied, as we've said we would, on behalf of that, because certainly sort of post-pandemic, it's very difficult to get people to turn up in person. So that is another element that we're working on. You're absolutely right. I think that as combined authorities are emerging around the country, and as government is investing in combined authorities more responsibilities, and some are further forward like ours, some are newer that are just coming around. There is a big interest in the role of Overview and Scrutiny, and how it will need to be effective in order for central government to continue to want to trust and devolve powers to regions. So I don't have the answer. I wish I did, but just so that you know, to us as an organization, it's a really important function.
Councillor Kettle.
Just make a point, because yes, I agree. I think the training would help us get our head round what we're dealing with here in the CA. And another aspect is how many elected members have actually had a guided tour of the CA, and who does what, where, and when. None of us haven't got a clue.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfectly valid point. And I suppose when I think about training, I would actually see that as being part of. So when you have, you know, we'd have an external company to deliver the scrutiny, the change of scrutiny from a local authority to a combined authority. But I think part of that also needs to be delivered from the CA about the structure of the CA, you know, the departments and all the rest of it, who does what, because you're quite right. It's only by being here a couple of years that you actually start to get your head around who does what, where and when.
Okay, we've got 35 committees now on the CA. So you get your head around what they're doing. So, you know, that sort of initiation, that sort of input to start with, that leveling up with ideas in many ways,
yeah,
as to what we're here for, what goes on where, who does what, and where the organisation is that actually works for the CA and on our behalf, you know. Does that make a fair point?
Yeah. Laura?
I'll take it as an action. We have a new municipal year coming up. Perfect timing. We'll find a way to do some sort of an induction, not, as you said, not on the roles of scrutiny are very bespoke and not for us to induct on that, but certainly for committee members to understand who in this organisation does what, how it works. We could have an induction day post-election. So if you leave that with me, I'll pick that up as an action.
You know, as was said earlier on, it needs to be done early in the political year.
Yeah.
If not the first or second meeting, or two together, fairly sharpish initiation to an introduction, and then a day's training and a look-see as to what's happening. So I think that isn't a bad idea all round.
Yeah, I think that's a really positive idea, Councillor Kettle, and I think I would suggest that if it could be done probably before the first formal meeting, you know, if it can be timetabled, that I think would be the most beneficial way of doing it. Andrew?
Yes, if you're doing that, an organisational chart with what the various bits actually do would be helpful. I mean, I have no idea what the relationship is between the Combined Authority and Transport for West Midlands. They do seem linked.
Same organisation.
That might well be true, but I don't know that. If you know what I mean. So that something along those lines would actually just help us work out where what this thing actually does, really.
I've got Councillor McCarthy followed by Amanda.
We talk about scrutiny here, but we basically conduct a series of desktop reviews. Certainly in industry, and if you were reviewing a part of the health service or anything serious, a desktop review wouldn't take you very far, and perhaps it doesn't. You know, human beings, a lot of the members have been very active in their local societies and have got a broad range of interest and broad range of expertise. So I think many of them would welcome the opportunity to actually go to one of the bus providers and have a meeting room off on that day. So we have our review there and spend just a bit of time afterwards, at least seeing a bit of reality, or before, because when I used to work for Jaguar Land Rover, we had a relationship with Ford of America, and you either went to America and presented your projects or they came over to you. But what we always used to do was to show them the vehicle we were developing before we had the review. It made such a huge difference to how the review went and the questions that were asked.
So more site visits is what you're suggesting. So I mean, we were hoping to get the Green Square Accord one in, and we haven't been able to do that, which is unfortunate, because I think that would have been a really good example of the type of thing you're talking about.
That would help people who end up finding themselves coming to one place all the time, and some of these things will be dotted around the West Midlands a little bit. I know that will be harder for some people, but it's harder for some members all the time, because they have to come here. The other thing is that we don't promote public transport use here. We have to claim back the cost of the railway. You pay for it, yes, but there might be a better way of promoting public transport by offering, in effect, a pass that's used at that time. It's easy to control because we know when the meetings are, so it's just unlikely to be abused. People will be taking a risk.
Yeah, but useful points, and I certainly like the thought about some site visits, and so I think that gives us a few things we can think about for the next year and take forward. Amanda?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a few observations as a non-elected member. So training, absolutely, would really value that. I think one of the interesting things is, so what's the difference between us and the Transport Scrutiny Committee? Although it's probably in the title that they're only looking at transport, but actually, what does overview and scrutiny mean? So, and also, what's the role of the audit committee? Because Laura, you've just mentioned, you know, millions and millions washing through public money, our accountability to government on that. So, although I've was at the meeting where the annual budget was presented, well, what is the role of this committee from a financial accountability perspective, or does that probably sit with the audit committee? Question, and possibly one for training. I would say thank you, because Chair, you and Lindsay both did an induction with me, so that was really helpful into at the time, the role of the committee, but being here only sort of poses more questions. I think your question with regard to proactivity and public engagement, I think, you know, as everybody's really busy, everybody's got a busy life, so this is a very important scrutiny function, very important function, but actually have people got time? And I suppose the key thing is, do people know where to find visibly see the committee or look afterwards on YouTube? I think that's the key thing. And you know, how many views on YouTube? I think it's one of the key metrics. One observation just around quorum. I did wonder, where does 11 come from? Because it's rather an abstract number, and I just wonder whether does everybody need to meet physically? Is a hybrid model an option to actually increase quorum? Question mark, because you know that might be just part of the governance structures that can't be unpicked, but just in terms of keeping a vibrant committee with higher attendance, are there opportunities there?
Dan will pick the answer up on that one, Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so 11 seemed like a random number. For both this scrutiny committee and audit committee, the government have set out in regulations that the quorum must be 2/3. So 11 is 2/3 of our membership. The difficulty that this committee and audit has, not only at the West Midlands CA but across combined authorities across the country, is that quorum is a high threshold. For all other meetings, combined authorities are allowed to set their own quorum. So they might do it at half, they might do it at a quarter. But the government, at the time they established combined authorities, specified, mandated that the quorum must be 2/3. So we don't have any local discretion, for example, just to say, okay, ours will reduce it for next year in the way we have with other committees. So that's an issue, and we've been lobbying, and all combined authorities have been lobbying quite hard on that to no avail at the moment. But that's why it's 11, but it's 2/3, and to implement that.
Okay, so I think that gives us, Andrew, last point.
I just think we ought to be asking committee members, why do you come? Why don't you come? What could be done to get more people to come? And that's going to have to be handled reasonably tactfully. I don't know whether you do it by a questionnaire or actually get somebody to ring them up and ask them, but I think everybody ought to be asked those questions, because I know why I come. If I was working, I'd know why I didn't come.
Yeah, I actually, when we were talking earlier, I kind of thought about that, and I did think it might be worthwhile us doing, now we've come to the end of the year, picking up a survey with members who were nominated to this committee at the outset, and picking up some of those points, and also picking up the point of what would make it better for you, what would make it easier for you to come, bearing in mind the legal constraints that we have. Jackie?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point. I mean, that's the point I was making anyway, historically, but do we always have to have the meeting here? You have different people from different authorities. Can we not sometimes have the meeting, say, at Sandwell, just as an example?
There is no reason why it has to be central. What I would say is that going back, I don't think you were on the committee, it was when Councillor Hughes was chair, and we did decide to do that and move it around, and it was a bit of a disaster, wasn't it? To put it bluntly. It's not to say that it wouldn't. It's not to say it couldn't work in the future, but maybe picking up Martin's point around site visits, you could incorporate that, you know, in terms of moving around. But yeah, it was a raging disaster.
Oh, okay. At least it was tried.
They tried it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Ian?
Well, talking about the quorum and the number of committees and whatnot, last year I had a chat with Andy, and I suggested to him that we were discussing the problems of quorum and whatnot, you know, and I said, if we reduce it to 10 committees, but executive committees, and work them in tandem, so that one decision one day would be picked up within, say, 2 days, and within about 20 days, it would go through the system, and connectivity between interconnected committees, you know. And I think we could look at it differently. If we only had 10 committees with executive power and they worked in series, we could do things far quicker. And really, the important part now of the delegated budget, which is what we're talking about for the CA, is that ideas are put into action quickly early in the political year, especially, so that we see the results throughout the year. And the sooner that decision is taken and the money is dispersed, the sooner we get activity within our economic environment. So, yeah, this has been discussed actually, and I frankly think that the concept of 35 committees is absurd. I would strip it down to 10.
I think some of your points may well be picked up through the transport governance review, because I think what started off as solely a transport governance review is now looking at in the wider round committees and those that have decision-making responsibility versus those that don't. So I think some of those points will definitely be picked up in the transport governance review. Thank you all for your input on that. That gives us something, I think, to work on going forward for the next municipal year. Whether I will be here to see it through remains to be seen. For those of us that are up for election this year, you know, it may be that it'll be nice knowing you all, but we may be that. We will see. So if I can move on to the next item, which is the grant register. We've got Kate Taylor to present the grant register, but also Melissa Brown has joined the call just to update a little bit on the situation with the Commonwealth Games legacy funding paper that went to board in December. So if I can hand over to Kate.
Thank you, Chair, and again, apologies for not being with you today in the room on there. I will take the paper as read on there. I have drawn attention in the covering paper for the grant register to some of the larger funds that we have had since you last received this in January. So we've had, particularly around the skills, we've had confirmation of our devolved grant budgets for adult education and free courses for jobs, which is the new name for level 3 funding. So you will have seen that funding before, technical boot camps, and also continued funding for Thriving to Work. In terms of kind of newer funds that we have had in, a social housing fund of circa sort of 14.9 million, and a debt in there. And there are also some smaller funds on the grant register, new ones around things like air quality, for example, and some around joint working that we're doing around, particularly around autonomous vehicles. In there, so some good news around new funds that are flowing into the CA, obviously for the benefit of the region. There, I am happy to take any questions that people may have specifically on the grant register before handing over to Melissa on the Commonwealth Games piece.
Okay, I've just got one quick question, and I'll bring it back. My question was around the social housing fund. How will that be devolved to local authorities? Will it be a bidding process, or will it be a straight head of the population allocation? I think Laura's just.
I might hand over to Laura. Yeah, it's my first day back, I'm afraid. So,
so this is a decision for local authorities. So at the last conversation of the mayor met leaders, we had a chart that had you could split it 7 ways. It would be this much. You could do it based on overall housing stock would be this much. They have asked for a little bit more analysis to be done around the stock calculations, and then I think the leaders will need to take a decision. For us, it's just it is pure double devolution. So we've got the money; it's accounted for in the financial monitoring report. So we're not particularly worried about that. There's a year to spend it. It's really for the local authorities to decide how they want that allocated, and we'll devolve it accordingly.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Joe. It was more or less the same question, although it does refer to registered housing providers, at which point I'll declare an interest. But I think I'm aware of one Black Country local authority that's gathering intelligence, particularly with regard to damp and mould. So I don't know if that is linked to this, because then if it flows into local authorities, is it also flowing out to registered housing providers with stock in the area?
I think it will be up to each local authority how they choose to do it. So I suggest once it's been decided that best report to them directly.
You order that will go through the leaders meeting, will it?
Yes, it will.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring in Melissa now for just a quick update on the Commonwealth Games legacy funding.
Hi, thank you, Chair. So the Commonwealth Games Legacy Enhancement Fund, and to give it its full name, is the £70 million that DCMS wants to give the Combined Authority, and that money is coming from unspent contingency within the overall Commonwealth Games budget. At the December Combined Authority Board, it was agreed that this money would be split across 4 thematic pillars, which were based on a streamlining of the original legacy programmes, which included, for example, things like community cohesion and inclusion, physical activity, jobs and skills, and cultural participation. And we crunched these down into 4 pillars, and I'll just list those in summary and the value that was allocated. So we have an economy, trade and tourism pillar at £38.9 million, an inclusive communities pillar at £20.8 million, culture and heritage pillar at 4.07 million, and similarly wellbeing and sustainability at 4.07 million. Those were the allocations that were agreed by the December board and have been agreed with DCMS, which is the grant provider. Since that December meeting, officers has been working with local authorities and games partners and other stakeholder groups to really try to sort of shape the programmes that will be delivered within each of those pillars. And we've been very keen with that to make sure that one of the key things that we achieve is that where there are communities that felt excluded from the original benefits of the games, they are able to feel a positive impact from this legacy enhancement fund. And this, for example, will come through in the inclusive communities pillar in particular. It's probably also worth noting that there's been particular local authority engagement and debate since the December board on the economy, trade and tourism pillar, which we anticipate supporting, among other things, the 2026 European Athletics Championships. And this is an area in particular that DCMS is very keen to see the Legacy Fund support, and it's likely to form a grant condition for them, for us. So the proposed programmes have been discussed with the Mayor and Portfolio Leads meeting, which has met a couple of times in March to talk through the details of this. And now the outcome and the proposed set of programmes is due to go to the CA board for sign off this coming Friday. Unfortunately, we haven't yet been able to get the board paper round for that, as we only received the Mayor and Portfolio Leads sort of final steer on Friday, but we're working as quickly as we can to get that board paper out now. And then following board discussion, we anticipate final government sign off of the funding coming through in the following weeks. Officers will then, during the pre-election period, work to develop the business cases with the cover that we hope to receive from the board on Friday. And those business cases will then go for approval at the Combined Authority's sort of investment board in June following the election period. I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions.
Amanda and then Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just conscious that there's quite significant funds as part of that legacy fund. I guess I'm asking for surety that those funds will generate additionality. There's a potential risk that part of that fund might be used to plug spending pressures elsewhere, and I'm just wondering at a future point, would it be appropriate for the committee to see where those funds are being spent?
I'm happy to pick. That's absolutely fine. They will all be subject to full business cases going through the investment board of the Combined Authority. So they will be fully open and transparent, and if Scrutiny would like to have a role in that, I suspect that is most welcome.
I think that we'll probably make the recommendation and that goes on to the next year's plan, because we don't have another scrutiny meeting after today, so it'll go to the formal programme. Jackie?
Thank you, Chair. My question's with regards to equitable distribution. In particular, when we talk about BAME, again, a very important issue. If we can demonstrate that we've got a quota of what community groups that these funds go to, and I'll be a bit more explicit. So if we talk about BAME and we have these funds go to, say, all Sikh organisations, you're not meeting the needs of Black and other ethnic groups. If we talk about white groups and a Polish group, say, for example, gets a lot of funding and white groups get left out, then there's not equality in distribution of funds. So I'm happy to help with this because I'm not even sure if I'm explaining it properly, but I'm happy to support and help as much as I can so that groups aren't left out and so that we don't say, well, we've met the quota because we've given that funding to say a Sikh group or a Muslim group, and then other groups are left out because of that. Am I making sense?
You are, but actually at the moment, there are no quotas at all. It's for a number of these funds, it will be a bidding process. And one of the challenges will be the time frame in which to spend the money. But as Melissa indicated, we're spending quite a lot of time now thinking about how we have some sort of a steering group for making sure that it really makes an impact in communities. So perhaps that's something I can talk to you about outside the meeting, Councillor Taylor.
Okay, thank you. Melissa, is there anything you want to finish on?
No, nothing I think I'd add in addition to what Laura said. Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming along today and presenting that, and I do appreciate the fact that it was challenging because there's been the time frame and the time delays on getting it through Mayor and Met leaders, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
If we can move on then now. The next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee, which we can't do because we're not quorate either. Just to let people know that at Transport, we've actually had to cancel the next meeting of the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee, which should have been this coming Thursday. We've cancelled that because the main agenda item for that meeting, which was the Transport Governance Review, we don't have the paper for that. That isn't ready yet. So that has been postponed. But just to let members know that I've met with the chair of Transport Delivery Committee. We will be meeting again early in April because we hope that there will be a paper early in April for us to see. And then we will be convening an informal meeting of scrutiny on Friday, the 21st of April at 10 AM for members of Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee and Transport Delivery Committee to look in more detail at the proposals. Even though it will be an informal meeting, we will still have the opportunity to input into that because the CA don't hold any formal scrutiny meetings once PERDA kicks in, and PERDA will be kicked in by that point. Many local authorities do, but the CA don't. So that's just to bring you all up to date with that. And then agenda item 11 is the work programme. Obviously, we've made a recommendation from this morning that the Commonwealth Games legacy needs to be on that forward plan. But if there's anything for any member of the committee that they would like to see on the forward plan, then Councillor Burrows.
Progress on the adult education. If we're getting a lot more devolution of cash, we ought to be looking at how effective, maybe not the new cash is, but certainly the historical cash, and what the plans are specifically with the new cash. And by plans, I mean, where exactly is it going as opposed to the general areas?
Thank you for that. I think that the Trailblazer delivery deal as a whole, because of all the work Scrutiny did to input into that at the start. I think once we've got the deal agreed, then it will definitely need to come back to us. But absolutely, your point around skills and the funding that goes with that, but also understanding and tracking through funding that comes into any of the other areas of devolution. Okay, Councillor McCarthy.
Yeah, I looked at the work programme that's under consideration. It doesn't cover transport, so I would imagine there will be a separate transport scrutiny committee work plan, or if that doesn't happen that way, it will be integrated into here. But there's quite a bit in the WMCA delivery plan on transport, some quite key items that should be interesting to hear about. I think the key thing is not only just scrutiny, it's interesting. That's the other thing that brings me.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only assurance I can give you at this stage is that no transport items will be lost. We haven't yet seen the proposals in terms of transport, but there will still be a separate transport scrutiny subcommittee or how that work will be undertaken. So, but there will be nothing really lost because of however we move forward on that. So thank you. Okay, we have run over very slightly, so apologies to people, but thank you very much for your attendance and thank you all for your really hard work over the last year. I think we've done a scrutiny year to be proud of, so thank you all. And I do hope I'll see some of you next year.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for making it interesting for us.
Thank you.